new regulations, and suddenly, out of the, I'm cutting this short, right, because we're not going to go on all night. Okay, the FIA came up with some new regulations, which really turned the sports car world upside down in its head, and suddenly we had big monster Ferraris racing against big monster Porsches. Porsches usually came out on top, of course, because they were better built. Yeah! And naturally they had better drivers too. But it really created a wonderful scenario for the late 60s, early 70s, in fact even longer than that, when it was one against the other, and great, for both sides.
That's the good guy, bad guy. This movie's interesting too. There are 3 actors from around the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 3 actors who are known a lot for loving racing, and that is James Garner and Steve McQueen and Paul Newman. James Garner beat Steve out of the gate a little bit with Grand Prix. Paul Newman did Winning, and then following that, Steve was able to put LeMans together. How important was this movie for your dad? He went off, well, when Grand Prix came out, your dad went off and made little movies like Thomas Crown Affair and Bullet, so he wasn't, not doing anything. But
Frankenheimer did want Dad to do Grand Prix, and it just didn't work out because, like you said, he was working. But Le Mans was his vision, and God, it's been 42 years, and this thing still holds up. And you guys came out. Thank you very much for that, man.
Derek, when you find out that an actor, and Steve McQueen is a big actor at the time, when you find out that you've been contacted and there's a movie in production called Le Mans, what were your feelings about who's this Hollywood guy coming to the racing world?
Well, I knew who he was because I'd seen all those fabulous movies. He just didn't make quite enough of them, but it really was phenomenal. And to get the chance, my first Le Mans was that year of my life. And I actually raced for Ferrari, so they did take the best drivers to Porsche because I joined Porsche the next year. Thank you, Vic. But anyway, it was just fantastic, that opportunity to go and do a film like this and realize you can be part of it. Plus, you can earn $100 a day. We weren't earning that as racing drivers, so let's go and do a movie. And it was great. I'm so glad I did.
And the risks they were taking every day for $100 a day. I mean, they were filming at speed every day, 100, 200 miles an hour, 240. So it was, I was in awe of these guys as a kid.
But when it was really dangerous, we got 200 a day.
Right.
You don't know how dangerous that was, today.
The other thing, when you watch this film and talking about safety, if you know anything about racing today, Vic was saying it's almost like these cars are built too safe. That the drivers, young drivers, take chances they shouldn't. When you watch this movie, you'll be stunned at what you see and the lack of safety. And that's just the way they drove back then.
Well, there was no other way. There was no difference. All you could do was do it. I mean, if I didn't drive a 917 or he didn't drive a 917, there were hundreds of drivers out there that would jump at the chance. Every Grand Prix driver would have wanted to do it because it was the ultimate car to drive. And there's Oriol Servio here today. If you said to him 40 years ago, would you drive, if you didn't drive in Formula One, would you like to drive a 917 at Le Mans? He would have said yes. Wouldn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, see it yesterday.
By the way, that's IndyCar driver Oriol Servio. Last weekend, great drive at Long Beach.
I hope this movie moves fast enough for you. It really does when you see it on a big screen. It kind of takes you in the moment. That's the beauty of seeing these movies on the big screen. This movie's also legendary because Steve McQueen was an actor who was known for, kind of eliminating dialogue. I can say it with a look, he would say. Talk about your dad a little bit and that talent that he had for what he could do on screen.
He just knew what was right for him, and it wasn't a lot of dialogue. I've got a lot of his old scripts, and the main or the common theme is whenever my dad had a big speech, there'd be a big line crossed through it, and he'd pick a couple important words. He'd hand everything else out to the other actors around him, and when there was something important to say, he'd say it. And it could be one word, it could be a look. But he knew what was good for him, so. Yeah. And boy, I got that look if I didn't take out the trash.
Yeah, really. For you guys, you guys had this morning when I met with you, you had some amazing photographs from the set. And if you didn't know who Steve McQueen was, it looks like a bunch of race car drivers just sitting around telling stories. How was he accepted in the racing world with you guys?
Well, I mean, he was accepted totally and utterly because he was such a good driver. And on reflection, he was, I think, a better driver than we even gave him credit for at that time. But I mean, he just loved being with us. And as I said earlier, the fact is that we didn't want to be actors, so we weren't trying to stand and play his game. He actually wanted to play our game, and that was to be a better racing driver than he was. And so therefore, everything we did, he wanted to be part of. So we had this incredibly close relationship. We didn't, if he wanted to be who he was at all, and he was used to having people chasing him, you know, standing under in his shadow saying, "I'm Steve McQueen's friend." I had my picture taken with him, and that with us, we were just pretty good race drivers, and he wanted to be part of that group, and he became part of it and was totally accepted.
It was important he wanted your guys' respect.
Yeah, well, I mean, anybody can sit with us at 180 to 200 miles an hour with ease without, I mean, I never saw him spin the car. I never saw him go off the road. In a car that, as Vic said earlier tonight, was not to be driven by idiots. And he had hardly driven it. I mean, even if he'd driven it a little bit here and there, but he hadn't driven it the way we'd driven sports cars. We all came through single-seaters, Formula One and things like that. And he'd come through a little bit of racing, of course, but not the way we had. And to drive a car like a 917 wasn't easy.
Vic, if he had... Jack?
Can you tell that story about you and Joe Sifford and Dad in the middle?
Have we got time for that?
Okay. It's a good one.
Okay. Yeah, there were several stories on the movie, very funny ones, but this particular one Chad's talking about is we were coming to a place called White House, Maison Blanche, and we come up there at 160, 170 miles an hour, probably more, dab of the brakes down to about 150, 160, and go through a right-hander and a left-hander. And as we went through there, of course, we were accelerating on the way out. And as we came up there one lap, of course, we got fed up with the fact that we were doing it at 80% or, you know, we weren't going flat out because we didn't want to have Steve to crash. It was a difficult old corner. And by the time we'd done about 5 takes, I was in front of the Ferrari, and then there was Steve behind, and then Joe Sifford in another 917. And as I came up, I thought, oh, damn it, I'm just going to go through faster this time. So I went through as quickly as I could, which actually was, in a Ferrari, I have to say, wasn't quite as quick as you could go in a 917, so they could stay with me. We come to the corner, Steve's right behind me, and we get up to the Ford chicane, and when we get there, Steve just leaps out of the car. He's white, he's livid. And we said, what's the problem? And he said, you lunatics, and so John Sturgis said, what's the problem, Steve? He said, these lunatics, they took me through there flat out. And I wanted to say, well, you didn't have to keep your foot on the throttle. You can lift off when you want to. And he just stayed with us. He was that sort of guy, really gutsy.
You threw the gloves down and he accepted the challenge. Yeah. Could he have, if he had really studied and focused, could he have been a race car driver?
Well, he already was a race car driver.
Yeah.
You know, with Peter Ripson, he finished second at Sebring that year in the 12 hours driving a Porsche 908 with his left ankle in plaster because he'd broken it falling off one of his bloody bikes. And he did his fair share of the driving. It was a 12-hour race, and he drove just about half of it. Another thing, Derek was talking about what he was doing during the filming of Le Mans as well. A lot of the, one of the things that many of you probably don't know is that to make the films, Steve took 9 complete camera crews to Le Mans, and they filmed the whole race. So almost all of the actual racing you